Good afternoon, everybody. This is Professor Tarabishy from the George Washington University School of Business. I'm Deputy Chair of the Department of Management at GW. I am delighted and honored to have here Dr. Chantal Carpentier, Chief of the United Nations Conference of Trade and Development, UNCTAD. So we are just delighted to have you here, Chantal, today on a Sunday. Thank you for giving us some of your time on behalf of GW here. We have we have a class here, I think a little bit of a history making here at GW Business School. This is the first course, graduate course, and on entrepreneurship ecosystems and the sustainable development goals. So we actually have a course titled Sustainable Development Goals and Entrepreneurship Ecosystems. So I know we've been working on this for a couple of years now, so we're finally putting it together here. And I have all of my students joining today. We have a 2-hour session today, so we did the first hour, and now we're all switching here. And then I also have students from my other classes joining, and I have people from around the world joining together. So I think this is just going to get bigger and bigger. As you said, it's starting a movement here. I don't want to steal any of your time. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself, and then maybe share your slides, and then we'll all listen in and kind of pitch in. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ayman. It's a pleasure to be with you today on this very snowy day in New York. Not sure what the temperature is in DC, but here it's nice, beautiful snowstorm. I'm delighted to be here and be part of this movement. And I just want to start by saying, Ayman, that I was a reviewer for the special edition of the International Journal of International Council of Small Business. And one of the articles that was submitted was I can't remember which school, unfortunately, I should have looked at it. But basically what they did is they early and often introduced the student to the SDGs. And what it created is basically a legend of young creative entrepreneurs that went out to the world and to solve the world's problem, but well equipped to do that. So I think it's part of what we're doing here. So with further ado, let me just share my screen with you. Not sure. It's asking me if who can share. Okay, I got it. Okay. All right. So just if you could just confirm that you can see my screen. All right, I see a nodding. So basically, my name is Chantal Carpentier, and as Ayman said, I'm the chief of the New York office of the Secretary General for UNCTAD in New York. And what we're going to talk about today, and most of you will have seen already the other presentation I've made, so I don't want to go too much into detail, but what I want to do is review quickly with you the history of the Sustainable Development Goal, entrepreneurship, micro, small, medium enterprises, and the SDGs and the conventional view, which is basically growth and job creation. And then UNCTAD's work in support of SMEs, and then the constraint that MSMEs are facing to be agent of change for the SDGs. And then put that in the context of the COVID-19 era. And what have we learned, and what does that change in terms of MSMEs? So a quick history of the SDGs, and most of you by now are probably expert at this. From 2000 to 2015, we had the Millennium Development Goals, which were pretty much 8 goals, really 7.5, on social issues, because the environmental one was never really developed. And so basically, these goals were a compact between developing and developed countries. And developing countries agreed to take on these goals of improving health and education and reducing poverty, while developed countries would support them financially with knowledge and technology. And it was not that successful. There was some progress, but there was also not as much progress as one would have hoped. And by 2015, when it was time to look at what's going to happen with these goals that were pretty much unfinished, the Rio Plus 20 came along, which was the celebration of Earth Day, which was celebrated 20 years earlier. And the question became, okay, well, what do we do to rekindle our leaders to basically implement sustainable development, which was already, again, it was commitment made 20 years prior, but not much progress on them. And what came out of that are 17 sustainable development goals, as well as part of the 2030 agenda for sustainable development goals. And these goals are very powerful because they form a framework for action. They give a sense to globalization, and they cover every single part of our life. They are addressing the unfinished business of the SDGs. So basically SDG 1 through 6 and 7, where you're basically talking about, but they're much more ambitious because they're trying to eliminate all poverty and eliminate hunger and give equality, universal access to quality education and health to everyone, as well as the economic empowerment of women, affordable access to water and renewable energy, a decent job and decent work for everyone with inclusive economic growth, infrastructure innovation to be able to support our economies, addressing inequalities, sustainable consumption production, sustainable cities, and also climate change and life, biodiversity, life on land, life in the ocean, as well as peace, and then partnership, 17. But it's not just the partnership in terms of partnership like Ayman and UNCTAD with ICSB in furthering some of the goal, but it's also the means of implementation for the goal. So under 17, you also have trade and finance and capacity building and data provision. And the major difference between the MDG and the SDGs are twofold. One is in the content. They're much more ambitious, as I mentioned, aiming to absolutely eliminate some of these vexing problems. And second, they are addressing in an integrated way the economic, environmental, and social issues, and therefore addressing the root cause of the problem and not just trying to address the outcome of the problem. But in the process itself of how we achieve the SDG, and I was privileged to be the supporting the major groups, non-state actors' contribution to the SDGs in the negotiation. And it was open, it was transparent. We had crowdsourcing of input from around the world, and we actually had training programs. We had specific briefing and contribution from NGOs, from the private sectors, from local authorities, and others. And that make a big difference in terms of ownership and accountability. But what's also important is that these goals are interconnected. And the big dots here are the goals, and the small dots are the targets. And as you can see, all of these targets are interrelated, and some of them more than others. But the bottom line is we cannot approach the SDGs and its targets in isolation. We have to consider the synergies and the trade-off amongst them if we actually want to advance them all and not advance on some while going back on some others. And what's also important is they provide a framework on how to develop policies and programs, and I'd say our education system. Why? Because yes, it is true that we're still trying to create prosperity for all, and it's people-centered. So we're trying to make sure we have no poverty and no hunger, and education and health for all, and economic empowerment of women, and then prosperity for people. But that has to be done within the limit of the confine of the planet resources. And that's the environmental goals that you have at the bottom here. That is very important. And all of this is, of course, dependent on these top two at the top here, peace and partnership. Sustainable development doesn't happen without peace, and peace doesn't happen without sustainable development, and partnership with the same thing. So that's kind of the background, and you've seen them, so I'm not going to spend more time on them, but would welcome any question you may have. Then what about the link between entrepreneurship, MSMEs, and SDG targets? Well, I think by now you probably know that our leaders did recognize the role of youth and adult having the relevant skills. So that's you in universities to have the right skill to be able to develop the entrepreneurship skills, as well as continuing education. So the people like me that can keep on improving their skills, including technical and vocational, to be able to actually advance especially with the digital transformation that we're going through. And then there's also under SDG 8, target 8.3, which call for policies that support entrepreneurship, creativity, and innovation, as well as encouraging the formalization and growth of MSMEs. And then under 9, it's basically calling for financial services to be supportive of the MSMEs, as well as in their integration into global value chains. Now, what were the constraints that MSME were facing before the COVID-19? Because what we'll see is that what COVID-19 does is just amplified the constraint that the MSMEs were already facing. So I'm not going to go in deep into this, but just to highlight that they already were facing limited access to resources, information, especially about markets and suppliers. They were less likely to obtain bank loans, thus relying on their own money, family money, or friends' funds. And in developing countries, 40% of MSMEs had unmet financial needs to the tune of 5.2 trillion per year. And in the Latin American countries and Caribbean, only 45% of small businesses have access to formal financing institutions. Only 45%. And the situation is actually worse in Africa and Asia for MSMEs in terms of access to formal financing institutions. Now, what about digitalization, which we're seeing accelerating with the COVID-19? The digital readiness of MSMEs is extremely important, as we, I think, all know. The online platform can provide help the MSMEs connect to national and international customers, reduce costs, outsource business and intelligence services, cloud computing and AI, can provide pay-as-you-go services. There's no investment upfront. You can predict the risk and market fluctuation, and there's low cost of service automation. And blockchain can help decentralize information. They reduce transaction costs and agency costs, and also help to build trust amongst partners. And all of these are good. However, when we look at the digital divide, and actually what's the access of MSMEs and some people in the world to digitalization, it creates a problem and raises concern. So 50% of the world population is digitally unconnected. So they don't have access to any of these advantages of digitalization. And the majority of them are girls, women, and marginalized groups such as migrant and refugees. And ethnic groups in countries. And in developing countries, the lack of digital infrastructure, public and private support, regulation and institution, and digital skills and awareness is basically further empowering the micro small enterprises to take advantage of this digitalization of the economy. And on top of that, platforms are monopolistic in nature, and therefore it's extremely hard for these MSMEs or these developing countries now to develop their own platform for their own countries because of the network effect of the already existing big platform and lack of competition. And another important things to keep in mind is that LDCs, the poorer the country, the more the digital divide is pronounced. And if it's for women in these countries, the digital divide is even bigger. So basically, what's the impact of MSMEs? I'm trying to get rid of these bars that keep getting in my way. So the impact of COVID-19 has been tremendous and really worrisome on MSMEs. So MSMEs represent 75% of the job lost in sectors most affected by COVID-19. No, MSMEs represent 75% of all the job in sectors most affected by COVID-19, I'm sorry. And 80% of the workforce in tourism sector, for instance, are at risk of losing their job, which represent 100 to 120 million jobs at risk. 1.6 billion or 2 billion to 2 billion of the 2 billion informal workers have suffered significant damage to their livelihood. And by the way, we've already lost 250 billion jobs as it is. And that we've seen related drop in incomes all the way up to 85% in Africa and the Americas. And you can see the other numbers there. And so the digital unreadiness of MSMEs is very problematic because those MSMEs that actually were already equipped to go online, to do commerce, to trade online, and especially internationally, did actually well during the pandemic. But without digital connectivity and literacies, MSMEs are substantially more at risk of being left behind. And in developing countries, the mounting national debt, inadequate fiscal measures, and debt is decreasing, and we can discuss why later. Supply chain interruption, access to the input they need, and lack of ICT infrastructure have left many MSMEs largely unsupported. And basically, in the 54 African countries, 80% of the MSMEs have been significantly affected by the COVID-19. And it's not surprising, since they're also the ones that are less digitally connected. So another thing that is troublesome is that these COVID-19 impact on MSMEs and in general are not gender neutral. Women are also, just like MSMEs, are overrepresented in the most affected economic sectors, such as tourism, services, and healthcare. They're the first one to lose their jobs, and girls are the first one to lose access to education. And they account for 50% of those financially excluded from the digital economy, because the the fintech has also been accelerating, and women are 56% excluded from this market. And women are also short on time as they fill in the increase in unpaid care associated with less care and home education. So COVID-19, we've estimated, is increasing the risk of failure by 9 to 10%, and that was by September 2020. Now we're in the second wave of the pandemic, and so these numbers will be even worse as we get more lockdowns. And of these, women-owned MSMEs are 27% more likely to not survive the pandemic than men-owned companies. And in LDCs, LDCs are least developed countries, the poorest countries of the world. 79% of the layoffs were from women-owned business compared to 4% in men-owned businesses. So what is it that we're doing to help MSMEs? First, let me just quickly tell you about UNCTAD. My headquarters is in Geneva. I run the New York office. We have a small office in Addis Ababa to help with the African Continental Free Trade Agreement and our colleagues there. And we're the focal point within the UN on finance, technology, investment, entrepreneurship, and related areas of sustainable development to support developing countries to fully integrate in a friendly way and take the benefit of the globalized economy. And we work for 3 pillars, which we'll go through: consensus building, research and analysis, and technical assistance. So quickly, consensus building is basically, we have 194 member states, all member states of the United Nations. And what we do is we present research to them. We show the value of some of the policy, what works on the ground. We do pilot project and try to advance their consensus in terms of what they need to support, what program they should put in place. So let me give you an example. We've been working for 30 years on boosting employment and growth in developing countries through entrepreneurship. We noticed that most of the government program would focus on just a narrow focus on credit access. And so we developed the entrepreneurship policy framework and implementation guidance to help developing countries put in place an entrepreneurship ecosystem. And then we basically adapted this policy framework to youth entrepreneurship. And then with IOM, the International Organization of Migration, we're for migrants and refugees and creating entrepreneurship there. And so the entrepreneurship policy framework is basically working into 6 steps that create that entrepreneurship ecosystem. We've also been working with ICSB and Argentina and other colleagues in actually having the 27th of June being declared the International Day of Micro, Small, Medium Enterprises to raise awareness about the contribution of MSMEs in our economy and the fact that they are constraint that they're facing that we need to address if we want to keep them as the fabric of our economy. And we've been celebrating this International Day with ICSB and other partners since June 2017. Now, we also provide technical assistance to member states to help SMEs and entrepreneurs achieve structural transformation. So we have an Emprotech centers in 43 developing countries, and this is building the skills and the of entrepreneurs. We have a business facilitation program that help formalize the MSMEs, and facilitate e-registration online, as well as regional and global integration in value chains. We also conduct e-trade readiness assessment. We've covered all of the least developed countries and the landlocked developed countries to assess where they need to, their gaps in their policies and their ecosystem to facilitate their micro small enterprises to take advantage of e-commerce. And we have an e-trade for all, an e-trade for women program. And this is basically bringing everybody in the ecosystem. So the international financial institution, the World Bank, the IMF, the Regional Development Bank, ITU and others, that once we've identified where the gap are in the developing countries, that they can actually see which partner can help them fill this gap. Just quickly on women entrepreneurship, we do realize that women do face additional constraints to take advantage of e-commerce. And therefore, we have an e-trade for women program that aims to empower women entrepreneurs in developing countries in the digital space by supporting them, creating them, and putting them into a network, showcasing the experience and achievement of these women, having them as role model for younger women in the region, in each of their region, and also connecting them to the decision makers so they can actually affect changes. And we have several other programs, including our youth forum that is basically working with youth to advance many of these programs, on the, be it on the consensus side, on the research and analysis, or the technical cooperation side. So why can't MSMEs take advantage of the 12 trillion business opportunities that the SDG present to and provide those solutions right now? And the UN Global Compact has actually done a study of micro, small, and enterprises that are members of the Global Compact. And they find that the small, medium enterprises that join the Compact, they're committed to learning and implement sustainability principles. But basically, their engagement is limited by a few things. One of them is the resources and activity provided by the Global Compact are of limited relevance to their companies. The support from the Global Compact local network, we have local network in each country, do not specifically meet their needs. And the language is not the right. So if you're in Latin America and you have something in English, it's not going to be helpful to you. And so you're in West Africa and it's only in English and you only speak French, it's also not going to be useful. And what happened is only 66% of these MSMEs, sorry, only 55% of these MSMEs are actually using the material that is put at their disposal because of these constraints. So the question becomes then, how do we go from use the wake-up call from the COVID-19 to go from the traditional view of having MSMEs as creating job and growth and kind of expecting they would do that on their own and have a laissez-faire approach, to actually supporting them to be agent of change in rebuilding our economy, but not only rebuilding the economy, but rebuilding resilient, green, and sustainable economies. And so first you have to acknowledge and realize that the MSMEs are the bedrock of our societies and communities. And by the way, we just conducted a survey that, an analysis of the stimulus packages after the financial crisis and now, and find out that actually there was very little program dedicated to MSMEs during the financial crisis in 2007, 2008. Thankfully, thanks to the work that we've all been doing and this movement and raising awareness about the importance of MSMEs, actually the stimulus packages this time are actually focusing on MSMEs. Why? Because they represent 90% of the businesses and 50 to 70% of employment worldwide, depending on the country. And if you include informal jobs, that can go up to 90% in several countries. And formal MSMEs contribute between 40 and 50% of the GDP worldwide. And informal workers represent 60% of the global workforce with no or little social protection, and many of them are women. And therefore, when you have something like COVID-19 that hit them, they have no other resources, so their resilience is close to zero. And before COVID-19, We had already estimated, the World Bank had estimated that we would need to create 600 million new jobs by 2030. And mostly these jobs would have to come from MSMEs to achieve the SDGs. And I just told you that we just lost 200 million jobs just since the beginning of this pandemic. And most of them are from MSMEs. So we're actually going backward instead of forward. So what is it that we're doing? Basically, the UN has developed a socioeconomic framework for response to COVID-19 that has 6 pillars. And one of these pillars is basically pillar 3 on protecting job, MSMEs, and informal sector workers for the reason that we just looked at. And it includes anything from country-specific policy advice and program, support for vulnerable groups, so basically cash transfer or food for kids that no longer go to school, that the school program used to provide them food, digital secure solution, particularly for MSMEs, green fiscal stimulus packages dedicated to SMEs, tech support for women and MSME entrepreneurs, these business linkages support I mentioned earlier, investment in MSMEs productivity and working condition. And so the whole idea is, while we're providing this support, why don't we also provide the support to raise awareness about the business opportunities? Because the one thing we don't want to do is build back better. You've heard, I'm sure, this expression. And who would want to go back to an economic system that collapsed within 2 months? And that basically delivered for the few at the expenses of the majority and the planet. We don't want to go back. No thanks. We actually want to rebuild better. And to do that, we're going to have everyone contribute. And this pandemic is actually offering once in a lifetime opportunity to redress pre-existing weaknesses and inequalities in this system. You saw, I already told you that MSMEs were not even supported during the financial crisis in 2007, 2008. So at least we're on the way, but we need to do much more because our MSMEs are still at risk of closing. We need to align the economies with the SDGs. So we rebuild resilient, peaceful, inclusive, and connected, because we saw that a lot of the economy is going online, and sustainable recovery that serve people and planet. The Secretary General of UN has actually called for 10% of the world GDP to help developing countries to jumpstart their sustainable development transition and decarbonize the economy. And before this COVID-19, all we could hear of was like, oh, we need to invest trillions of dollars in the developing countries to achieve the SDG. We don't have the money. Oh, it's going to cost trillions of dollars to implement the SDGs. We don't have the money. Well, guess what? Over the span of a few months, we had $13 trillion being printed by our central bank and basically helicoptered in to support the economy. Some of it has gone to MSMEs, not all of it, and much more is going to have to go to them. But some of these funds need to also go to developing countries that don't have the capacity. Their central bank cannot, first they don't have a central bank, and they can't print money the way we do, because they would devaluate their currency and then basically make it impossible for them to import their necessary goods, such as food and sanitary goods and supplies and medicines. So basically, we've developed several of the programs. And what's interesting is, in the past, UNCTAD would do its program, ITC would do its program, our Regional Economic Commission would do their program, and each one of us would kind of do a little bit here and there. Under this program that we've submitted to support the socioeconomic response framework, pillar number 3, we actually put all of our forces together. So all these regional commission, our partner DESA and UNCTAD, to come together to really develop a coordinated, all-inclusive program to support MSMEs around the world. And there's 5 clusters to it. One of them is to mobilize entrepreneurial ecosystem and strengthen business skills, simplify business registration and facilitation formalization, as we discussed, improve access to finance and financial literacy, increase access to technology innovation, and enhance access to markets. Within that, UNCTAD is focusing more on the entrepreneurship policy and skill facilitation, e-registration, access to finance, market, and trade with our partner ITC. and the whole policy environment, as well as how to basically address the non-competitiveness of these big digital platforms, like Amazon and others. And this is especially important for the least developed countries and economies in transition. So as I said, if we take this money and we use it to increase the literacy of MSMEs in the digital space, but also in their ability to develop eco-innovation for their local and emerging market, where large corporations may not find the market so appealing, or maybe they find it's unfeasible to reach these smaller market. It would create market for those MSMEs. They would advance the SDGs. They could use principles such as the circular economy, because MSMEs are often, we saw, resource constrained. Therefore, they're more suitable for frugal and circular innovation that actually eliminate waste and make them more resilient and cost effective. And we're also working with 31 UN entities to increase SDG policy coherence regarding ICT matters. And there we're aiming to facilitate the MSMEs access to broadband and the fourth industrial revolution technologies so they can actually innovate. And there's a focus there on women and eco-innovation as well. And I've been talking about these business opportunities. So what are these business opportunities related to achieving the SDGs that are available for these MSMEs? Well, first, this slide is just a few examples of them, right? There's 785 million people that lack basic access to drinking water services. So if a local MSMEs can actually find an eco-innovative solution, this is their market. We have 3 billion people without basic hand washing facilities. 701 million people practice open defecation. We still have 850 million people without access to electricity and modern energy, and so on. And so these are all business opportunities where government are increasingly putting more money, innovation, accelerators to support that, where our MSMEs can actually have a competitive advantage. I've already discussed this idea of a global Green New Deal, where the 13 trillions of stimulus packages that is already being put out there need to take into account and be targeted to MSMEs, women-owned, migrants, and all of the population that is more vulnerable. And for that, we also need sustainable foreign direct investment. And we're very concerned at UNCTAD. Our latest report just shows that FDI in the real economy, so this is a green project, it went down 42% in 2020. And so this is problematic because we need that money to go in these green, blue, orange, purple, creative, circular economy and finance these innovation that these MSMEs will have. And yet FDI is actually going down. Official development aid is going down. And this is why the Secretary General has asked for these 10% of GDP to go to help developing countries, because that would be one way of not only supporting the fibers of our society, which are micro, small enterprises and entrepreneurs, but also help developing countries exit from and recover from this crisis. I just want to conclude by just saying the obvious. We cannot afford to waste another crisis. We're already 6 years into the SDGs. We had made some progress before COVID-19 was it, but we were not on track to achieve the SDGs. And people on this call, on this webinar, including Ayman and others, are convinced that the entrepreneurs and MSMEs are key to actually achieve the SDGs in a green, resilient, sustainable way. And for that, we need massive public funds and policies with specific windows for women, youth, and green MSMEs to ensure they get the financing that they need, especially in developing countries. We need a special crisis fund to support MSMEs. They shouldn't have to wait for 6 months that the government actually managed to negotiate the package. There should be something already there for them. We've seen how many MSMEs we've already lost in our communities. We need to facilitate membership and collaboration between innovative, curious business mind, and this is the job of my friends at the universities as well here. We need to raise the awareness of MSMEs, of the SDGs opportunities. Again, this is the role of my friends as well at the universities, and also raise the awareness of early and often in entrepreneurship education program. So I want to stop here so that we can actually discuss these issues with you. Ayman, over to you.
Yep, thank you very much, Chantaline, as well. Very well presented. What I'd like to do now is maybe in the chat section, ask people to write some questions, and we'll try to get as many as possible here. But Chantal, let me start you with a question here, right? 3 years ago or 4 years ago, when we started all of this, there was very little at the university level with the SDGs. Okay, we could see it, and I think with the great work that you're doing across the board and other schools and other universities, the SDGs has picked up a lot of steam here. Why the disconnect between what the SDGs were happening with the United Nations in 2015 and now we're 2021, and then finally we see some traction? Why do you think there was such this disconnect? And maybe from the business schools, what's some of your ideas behind this? You traveled the world and you've seen a lot of it.
Well, there was a disconnect, and I've been asking my question that too. And because we have our higher education sustainability initiative that was created in Rio, even before the SDG were negotiated. So there was some university wanting to, align with the SDGs, but I think it's part of our universities basically being very independent and not wanting to be told how to do their curriculum and what to research. But eventually, I think because we had done such a consultation, and then there was so much ownership, that even those researchers and those professors like you did realize that it's actually doing a disfavor to their student not to introduce them to the SDGs. And so I think that once you do, and then also some of the great work that the business sector has done to demonstrate the business opportunities, because this is not just about doing good. This is about doing good while doing well. And so I think and also because of the financial market, because of climate change, I've realized that climate and other environmental risks are now top in terms of risk for business. And so business realized they need to address this issue. And therefore, I think it's coming from several places at the same time. And now we're seeing an acceleration thanks to people like you and others I think it's such a no-brainer that as soon as we talk to, and you know that because you've been there, as soon as you talk to people about it, they go, yeah, of course. But it's a matter of just having that spark.
So following up with this, we have the 17 SDGs here. If you're looking at the list here, this list is extensive and there's more to it if you go down to the goals here. What are some of the ones you say, Ayman, these are the ones that we think that we need to kind of look more closely at or engage more stakeholders into this? And I'll give you an example. This morning, I was reading the Washington Post, and they were talking about the President Biden's new stimulus package. And now right in it, they're saying that they're putting in $3,000 or $3,600 for childcare, right? Depending on your salary, right? And then in the New York Times, there's a whole section talking about women and moms that are leaving the workforce in droves because they just can't sustain the new model here. So now you have childcare, and then you have maternity, and you have, right? And so, but yet there's some good signs. The head of the WTO is the first woman from Africa coming in, right? So where do you stand in all of this? Saying, where do we head with all of this?
Yeah, I mean, it's really hard, and member states really don't want us to prioritize the SDGs, but there are some must-have. And the bottom line is, you can't achieve the SDGs if you only use the brain power and the labor force, 50% of your labor force. That means if you leave the women behind, it's impossible, right? So women needs to be at the table. Women do invent and create and engineer differently than men. We see the world differently. We just see different problem, though the same problem with a different angle. So our solution will be different. But if once we innovate and we create these solutions, we can't get financing to get our ideas to market, then we're still not able to contribute to market, right? To achieve the SDGs. So we need to take those all in together. And then while you do that, you also need to make sure that your solution are not making worse, as I was mentioning, the synergies and trade-off, the biodiversity, climate change, our ocean. And so and you need partners, because not one of us has all of the knowledge possible to address all the synergies and the trade-offs amongst the targets. But together we have that knowledge and we have the solution. And that's why we need to partner, we need to work together to achieve that. But definitely inequality, climate change, and gender are three of the goals that if we don't address those, we're not going to achieve the other SDGs.
Okay, so as I mentioned to you, our course title is about the entrepreneurship ecosystems and the sustainable development goals. So we put ecosystems, entrepreneurship ecosystems, just before the SDGs here. I know Samantha mentioned it, a couple other people mentioned here. So let me ask you, I'm going to put you on the spot here, but why not? What is your definition of an entrepreneurial ecosystem in your own words?
Yeah, well, for me, it goes back to this entrepreneurship policy framework. So for me, it's basically, and it has one thing that is actually missing, I think, that now. So yes, it's having the policy, so that the government has a policy on entrepreneurship. Many of them don't have an entrepreneurship policy. So that's one, right? Having that policy. Second, it's basically having a network amongst your entrepreneurs, and having the support, such as the accelerators, the training centers and others, financing, of course. But then this whole idea of connectivity and digital capacity, right? So the economy is digitalizing so quickly that if they're not able to access a computer and not only go to Facebook with the computer, but be able to create value out of their access, they're going to be left behind. And so for me, the entrepreneurship ecosystem is all of these pieces together. And that requires, Ayman, not just the labor ministry having an entrepreneurship policy, but it's the labor ministry working with the science, technology, innovation ministry, working with the industrial policy ministry, the trade ministry, so that all together they actually create these policies that are coherent and actually do allow the entrepreneurs to do what they do best without having all these constraints in front of them.
So under UNCTAD and the work that you have done globally here, share with us a best practice. Saying, you know what, Ayman, here's a small best practice that we can say that actually this all work together and this is how it manifested. Is there such as examples that we can showcase as best practices?
I don't understand what you mean. Best practice for what? For an MSME, for a government?
As an example, yeah, for an ecosystem, an entrepreneurial ecosystem that has facilitated an SDG in a way where we say, look, this is a good example where the ecosystem connected with the SDGs. And this is what has happened.
I mean, there are countries like Rwanda, for example, that invested heavily in digital training for their women and their girls, exchanges, and now they're basically creating innovation, and their women are being empowered. They're also in the decision making. So you get Ethiopia. Ethiopia as one of the most integrated circular waste. How do you call that? Waste management, waste treatment plant that create energy, clean water, create job, create source of revenue for informal worker that bring recycling material, and basically all of this from a small entrepreneur that basically saw the value of this, and basically but see, when it happens, Ayman, and this is why this education is so important, the one that we see that happen are entrepreneurs from Western or Eastern Africa or Asia that came in the US or in the UK and got their education and have access to capital because they have access to Silicon Valley and to other places. And then they go back and they can implement their solution. The problem is right now, there's a lot of innovation that's being done bottom up, pro-poor in these countries that don't see the light of the day because they don't have access to finance. So now that we're doing a lot of these courses online, how do we reach out to those entrepreneurs, creative mind in those countries and bring them to that level, right?
Yeah. So let me operationalize this a little bit for you. Maybe you can make the connection. We are now in the midst, maybe a couple of months away from vaccinations for everybody through COVID-19. But what we realize, it can't just be one group leading the way. It has to be the government, the private sector, the public sector, the community level, the NGOs. Again, I saw yesterday Yankee Stadium is turning into a place where people can go get vaccinated, right? And this is going to be playing out at a global level, where every got down to the village, Chantaline, they'll have to recreate a system in which to get people mass vaccinated. Are these signs of building an ecosystem that can then relate to the SDGs? Because once we build it,
Yeah.
there might be a roadmap. You talk about the handprint and the footprint, but where do you stand on this?
Well, I'm concerned about the vaccine because, and somebody's asked, well, are you saying that we should tell our government to go and give the money to developing countries, our stimulus package, give it to other countries? And yes, the answer is yes, because we've seen with the vaccine that if we only try to hoard the vaccine and vaccine our people and other people do not get vaccine, then the variant will develop and our vaccine become unuseful. And then we need to keep developing more vaccine because these variants are going to keep on developing, and we're as weak or as strong rather as the weakest of our health system out there. So the ecosystem here is, how do we empower? First of all, is the patent, right? How do we release the patent so actually these vaccines can be developed in developing countries, produced in developing countries under what agreements, right? Because this is a world emergency. And then how do we capacitate and turn these plants and to be able to produce the vaccine locally and support those ecosystems based on what we've learned in our countries. And some of them are way more advanced than us, by the way, to actually accelerate the vaccination of everybody.
It's radical. Your idea is radical.
Yes.
And somebody just mentioned saying, right, that we should give it away, but right, there's also this economics talk about the trickle down effect, where if you try to get the top going first, then eventually everything will come down. But you're using a whole different model here. I don't know the answer to this. That's why we're having this.
Because the trickle down effect has been proven wrong over and over and over again. And even those that were proponent, like the World Bank and the IMF, has basically since then says it doesn't work. You need to actually, this is why the SDGs include the social protection floor. And think about this, if we had, if our most vulnerable in our society had access to education to start with, had access to healthcare to start with, had access to, instead of being in the gig economy without any protection and having to go to work even if they're sick, we wouldn't be in a situation that we are right now. Actually, if we had implemented the SDG further, we would be much more resilient to this pandemic now. And so we can't make the same mistake in thinking that we can isolate ourselves. None of us will be able to, if you want to go travel again, and if you want to be able to open your business and everybody and have full capacity in your restaurant or in your business, we need to have the entire world vaccinated or have immune mass, what is the word in English? Mass immunity.
Yeah, mass herd or herd
immunity. I'm mixing the French and the English word here.
Yeah, let me change it a little bit here, because we have what we call the young generation coming here. The students that we have from high school. I saw somebody that's from a high school here, all the way that people are graduating here, right? Their mode of thinking is totally different than our generation, right? Right? And they soon will be in positions of power and authority here. The way they execute is a little bit different than us, the meaning of work and stuff like that. Is this just a matter of time where they come in and saying, why are we even discussing this? This is just the norm, that how we should apply this. Let me give you an example. For the first time ever in GW, the new venture competition, now the 100 teams that have submitted new ideas, right, had to tag one of their ideas to the SDGs. We left it as a question in their survey. So we potentially have 100 new ideas that might be related to the SDGs. So the innovation is happening remarkably here. What's your take on the future generations? Where do you think they're heading with all of this? Because they signed up to my class, but we have almost 100 people earlier here. What's your thinking about this?
Well, my hope is in these people for sure, because we've done a terrible job with this planet and people. Our system has left a lot of people behind, and the progress we've made is at the expenses of our ocean, our biodiversity, and climate, right? And this is the future we're leaving them. They're already doing something because they're the one in the street protesting, not now because COVID-19 doesn't allow them, but before COVID-19, they were already on the street protesting, and they're already inventing with purpose much more than we are. They also more looking in their investment to ensure they're aligned with their values. They also are digital native, and therefore you know, what do we do? I mean, when we have a problem with our computer or phone, we ask one of our interns because they're the one that are, they're digital, they're native. And so I have a lot of hope but we still need to help them because we have an urgency here. We have 9 years left. We have a decade of action now to achieve the SDG by 2030. And the transition is still possible if we all work on it. So we need to ensure that we accelerate knowledge sharing, accelerate co-creation, so everybody doesn't reinvent the wheel each time, because we're used to a model of competition. Well, I think these younger people are less on that mentality of competition than us and more on cooperation. And therefore, how do we support that? And you also know that our education model are basically 100 years old and in need of reform, because we're no longer forming, except for, you know, few exceptions like your course on entrepreneurship ecosystem and SDGs, we're not forming our student for the new economy and the new market labor need. And so it's I think it's the legacy we're going to leave is so if we don't invest these trillions of dollars now in that new economy, in these entrepreneurs and the co-innovation and circular economy and green economy, we basically not going to get there, right? And they're going to inherit a worse world than we have right now. And if we do, though, they take this opportunity and accelerate the transition towards the SDG and decarbonized economy, they actually could be better off than we are right now. But it's an important choice we need to make now. And that's going to lock us in for 20 years to come. Because these infrastructure that we put in right now, if we put a power plant versus a solar plant, this is an infrastructure is going to be there, right? And it's very important, these decisions.
So I'm going to leave you with one last question here. And it's the trickiest one of all. I've been thinking about it for a while here. So we started with the Millennium Development Goals, the MDGs, right? And we had a mixed bag of kind of what happened. The SDGs had all the right intentions, the right process, the right people, framework for that. And then we had in the midst of it a pandemic, which threw everything off. And they're going to expire in 15 years. What's after the SDGs, Chantal? What comes after the SDGs?
It depends on what we do now. It depends on where we put these trillions right now. Literally, Ayman, I'm not kidding. First of all, we only have 9 years left. And if we do invest these trillions in these, first of all, to redress, because what is COVID-19 doing? It just I can't speak today.
Exasperating.
Exasperating.
It's a tough word.
Existing inequalities and existing model that do not work. They're proven do not work, right? And so, and then we just celebrated the 75th anniversary of the UN last September. And basically, we did a survey around the world, a very extensive survey. And what is reassuring, Ayman, is that, first of all, the majority of the people around the world do realize that we can't solve these problems, each country one by one. We need the multilateral system where we work together. One country can't solve climate change, tax evasion, ocean plastic, all biodiversity loss. We can't solve migration. We can't solve, in none of the country, no matter how powerful it is, can solve these problems alone. So we need to work together. And in that survey, the majority of people in the world recognize that. And the younger amongst them, the age of people on this call, are actually even more convinced, first of all, that multilateralism is important instead of nationalism, and we all need in this together, and that they can actually contribute. And that's another reason why. And if we empower them, I think that post 2015, it's going to be basically just finishing up and tweaking up some of the stuff that is still remaining for the furthest behind that would add more to go, furthest to go. But if we don't, I don't know, Ayman. But it's not going to be.
So I have a theory, but I'm gonna say it now, and then we'll see in 15 years. All right. I think the Millennium Development Goals was the catchy term for millennium, which is for the year 2000, which was nice. Sustainable was a very insightful word in saying let's create some sustainability here. But I don't think a lot of people understand what sustainability means, and now they're starting to realize that it's much more complex. To be honest with you, Chantaline, my personal opinion is after the SDGs, what we should be calling them is the world goals, the WGs, the
Well,
world goals. It can't be anything more than the world goals and making it better. Why call it sustainable? It's the world goals. If you're not going to do that, the world is not going to exist as good as
yeah.
it gets here.
But it's the same. I agree with you, Ayman, but it's the same reason why people are saying they're going to invest in a new deal, a green deal, right? You need to kind of people to get, and by the way, the marketing around the SDGs from the big marketing firm, they call them the global goals and not the SDGs. They're the global goals already. So you're right on. You're right on. Yeah.
Yeah, and then I think Samantha's, oh, they took it already, Samantha? Oh, God. Okay, well, somebody took it already. You can never have a good idea because there's 1,000 good ideas there. Chantaline, we're almost out. You got 2 minutes. I want to give you this platform here to kind of share your personal opinion to all our partners and colleagues from around the world, but also to our GW School of Business students. And I hope Noof and everybody will tweet this. What message would you leave them while they're at home and stuck with this? What advice would you give them? Something that they take with it as they move forward in their world adventures.
One is belief. It's important to believe, and there's a lot of people that want you to believe that it's pessimist and everything is going wrong. It's not true. We've made some major progress in humanity, and just believe that you can make a change. Second, don't reinvent the wheel. Look at what is already existing. Who's already doing what? Partner, co-create. You're gonna get there faster. It's gonna be better, and you're gonna be happier. And third, convince one other person. Convince one other person, just one other person, that you can make a change and you can create a solution to some of these vexing problems. And third, fourth, I guess, do talk to your leaders to make sure that these trillions of dollars are getting us closer to the global goals and not further. Send them a letter, write to them.
Yeah, I think they'll do. Chantaline, you're amazing. The small problem I have with you is we need more of you. We need like 1,000 Chantalines, sent globally here, because you're just remarkable. You're just electric here. So on that, let's give Chantaline a big round of applause, everybody, right, for an amazing presentation. I know that the time just flew by here. So as you're right, this was a very powerful presentation here. I think it echoes well with everybody from GW. And on behalf of our deans at GW and the GW community and also ICSB, we want to personally thank you for your time today. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. And I look forward to come to GW soon when this thing is over.
Yep. And then for all my GW students here, you have a lot of content now. Let's get going. Thanks a lot, Chantaline.
Thank you. Bye-bye.